Well, hey guys, it's Mr. Schauber, and welcome to our college football presentation on coaches. And all I'm going to say about coaches is that just like in college basketball, oftentimes university programs are best known and associated with their coaches because a coach can be at a university for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and players are only there for a few years, right? So when you think of certain programs and their place in history, oftentimes a coach is, the first thing you think of. You think of Penn State football, you think of Joe Paterno, you know, um, you think of Alabama football. In the old days, of course, you'd think of Bear Bryant. In Ohio State in the old days, Woody Hayes, things like that. So coaches, of course, in college football have to be they wear a lot of hats, right? And in the old days, they wore even more. But you have to be a great recruiter, or at least you have to have staff that's great recruiters. You have to, I mean, and recruiting is a year-round thing, and you know, your program lives and dies with how great of a coach you are. So let's look at some of these great coaches in college football history throughout uh, the entirety of college football history. You have to start with Walter Camp, known as the father of American football. He invented, as a lot of these early coaches did, all kinds of things that the game now uses, right? So Walter Camp invented the football's line of scrimmage, system of downs, the snap back from the center, the point system, 11-man team, the two-point safety, among other things, right? And of course, you're going, well, you know, how could you invent those things? Well, the game was in its infancy back then, and late 1800s, and he was, he kind of he kind of just formulated the game as somewhat as we now know it. He was the first man to publish a book on football. He was known for selecting his annual All-American team. He coached at Yale and Stanford, and won three national titles at Yale in the late 1800s. So he then later on went and worked as an advisor to the U.S. military in World War I, helping soldiers become more physically fit. And but Walter Camp is known as the father of American football for good reason. Football kind of started really with him as we know it. Amos Alonzo Stagg, the legendary Notre Dame coach Knute Rockne, once said that all football comes from Stagg. He coached numerous places, but most notably the University of Chicago, and won 314 games in his career, two national titles, both at the University of Chicago, seven Big Ten titles. Of course, the University of Chicago is no longer in the Big Ten, but uh, they used to be, and he was amazing. Um, he was credited, like Walter Camp, Stagg was credited with inventing numerous things that the game now uses, like the man in motion, the fake punt, the T formation, the reverse, the double reverse, things like that, the huddle, all kinds of stuff, padded goalposts, numbers on players' backs, things like that. So definitely an innovator and kind of a founder, if you will, of modern football. Perhaps the most famous name in all of college football is this man, but it's his last name, right? John Heisman, because of the Heisman Trophy. He was also a great innovator of early football and coached, again, numerous places: Auburn, Clemson, Georgia Tech. Uh, Most notably, he won a national title in 1917 at Georgia Tech. His coaching record, you can see, was fantastic: 186 wins, 70 losses, 18 ties. But the Heisman Trophy is named after him, and that's what he is most famous for. And of course, the Heisman Trophy is college football's most recognizable award. It's highest award that can be won. So, John Heisman, great coach and the namesake of college football's most prestigious award. Glenn Warner, better known as Pop. Pop Warner. A lot of the places around the country today that have little league football programs, the programs are called Pop Warner, the Pop Warner League, and so obviously that's pretty cool. Pop Warner coached, again, a lot of these guys early on coached numerous places, but Pop Warner coached at the Carlisle Indian School, and therefore coached the legendary Jim Thorpe. He coached at Pitt, he coached at Stanford, uh, all kinds of places. You can see 319 wins, only 106 losses in his career, 4 national titles. All right, 3 with Pitt and 1 with Stanford. He coached 47 All-Americans. Uh, he also was an innovator. The screen pass, the single wing, the double wing formations, things like that. The use of shoulder pads, thigh pads, uh, he brought to the game. So Pop Warner, as well as a lot of these early coaches, were instrumental in making the game of football like we know it today. And so, of course, things always adapt and change and innovate over time, more and more. But Pop Warner is one of the original greats and a great coach. Fielding Yost, coach, you can see at Ohio Wesleyan, then Nebraska, then Kansas, then Stanford. Just like 4 years in a row, he was changing schools. And then San Jose State, he was an interim coach even that year. And then he went to Michigan. And it's at Michigan that he became perhaps the most dominant coach in college football history. Uh, at Michigan, he won 6 national titles, including 4 in a row, 10 Big Ten championships. And from 1901 to 1905, his point-a-minute teams went 55 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie. And they outscored their opponents. I mean, this is the most staggering stat of all time, I think. They outscored their opponents during those seasons 2,821 to 42. They just never gave up points. And they dominated, and they were scoring just gobs of points. So this is incredible to me. Michigan, he made Michigan the first powerhouse team west of the Appalachian Mountains. Okay, really, he made the first powerhouse Midwestern team was University of Michigan under Fielding Yost, and so just awesome. He beat Stanford while he was at Michigan in the first Rose Bowl game ever played, or excuse me, the first bowl game ever played, which was the 1902 Rose Bowl. So it would have been the first Rose Bowl as well. But uh, one of the signs of a great coach is that they also are great mentors to other up and coming coaches that will become great coaches in their own right. And so you can see that Fielding Yost, he checked that box. He at least 67 men who played for Yost or coached under him as an assistant went on to become head coaches in college football. So his coaching tree, as they call it, was enormous. And wow, I mean, those teams though he coached at Michigan were awesome. Knute Rockne is one of the most famous names in college football history. Coached at Notre Dame for a dozen seasons. He was born in Norway, immigrated to the U.S. when he was 5 years old, settled in Chicago, and at Notre Dame he popularized the forward pass. Again, it was mostly a running game, and it continued to be even when he was coaching and after. But he popularized the forward pass more than it had been previously, and he turned Notre Dame into a national powerhouse. They won 4 national titles, including his last season at Notre Dame. And he had 5 undefeated seasons while there. You can see his coaching record: 105 wins and only 12 losses. Uh, Tragically, he died in a plane crash in March of 1931, before the 1931 season was going to start. He was still going to coach, but he died in a plane crash. Tens of thousands of people attended his funeral. It was broadcast on the radio around the globe. He was a household name. He was famous worldwide for his legendary coaching abilities and his success, and he was just a good guy. So Knute Rockne, yep, still one of the great names ever in college football. Robert Nieland was the general. Okay, he was actually a brigadier general in the U.S. Army, and he was a football coach. Okay, and so he brought that mentality of the military over to football, and boy, his teams reflected it. 173 wins, only 31 losses while he was at Tennessee, and they were dominant. Okay, 4 national titles, 6 undefeated seasons. You can see he had undefeated streaks of 33 wins. Now you got to remember, 12 games a season, right? Basically. So 33 wins in a row, that's 2.5 seasons. 28 wins, that's over 2 seasons. 23 wins, undefeated streak of 19 of 14. Just wow, unbelievable. 5 SEC titles, 4-time SEC Coach of the Year. He's considered one of the great defensive coaches of all time. His teams had 112 shutouts, didn't allow a point in 112 games while he was at Tennessee, including 17 in a row, a season and a half basically, that they didn't give up a point, 1938 and 39. He is also credited with being the first coach to use sideline phones and game film to study opponents. And of course, football so much nowadays is all about game film. Got to watch film. You watch film to try to pick out your opponent's tendencies and how they do things, and so to try to gain an advantage. Of course, everybody does that now, but he was kind of the first guy to do that. And the University of Tennessee Stadium is called Nieland Stadium, named for him, which is awesome. But it was also designed by him. This guy was kind of the jack of all trades. So pretty awesome though. And Tennessee became a national powerhouse under Robert Nieland. Frank Leahy, legendary coach of Notre Dame, as well. 107 wins, only 13 losses while he was there. 5 national titles he won overall, 1 at Boston College, and then 4 at Notre Dame. He had 6 undefeated seasons at Notre Dame, coached 4 Heisman Trophy winners. His famous quote, of course, it's been used a million and one times since him. When the going gets tough, let the tough get going. All right. So Frank Leahy, one of the great winners in college football history, one of the great motivators in college football history, and kept the Notre Dame dominance going that Knute Rockne had started in the 1920s. Eddie Robinson, to me, is one of the great stories, great men, great coaches, you name it, in college football ever. He coached at Grambling State University from 1941 to 1998. So, I mean, this is unbelievable, right? Over 50 years coaching. He was the head coach at Grambling when he was 22. And his first years, and this is World War II era, right? His first years at Grambling is a small school. It's an all-black school, and you know, he had to do everything back then. They didn't have a big budget for the football program. So his first years there, he was the head coach, he was the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator. He was the everything coach. He mowed the field. He made food for road trips through the towns where his players would not be served because of segregation. He was the athletic trainer. He wrote the game stories for the newspapers. Okay, he did everything that you could do for a program, and he was a great coach, and he was a great man. He was a great motivator. You can see his coaching record. He won 408 games in his career. More than 200 of his players from Little Grambling State went on to play pro football. He had 27 straight winning seasons and 45 winning seasons overall. Won 9 black college football national titles. He was awesome. And I remember watching him coach. I mean, well, I remember him well. I mean, at Grambling State, of course, he was old when he retired, but 1998, I was in college. So I grew up watching Eddie Robinson coach Grambling State, and he was awesome. Always smiling, and but he was intense too, and he was just a tremendous coach. Bear Bryant. You can see coached at Maryland and Kentucky and Texas A&M, and then Alabama. Uh, he had tremendous success at Kentucky and made Kentucky put him on the map for college football. But because Kentucky was known so much for basketball and the football program wasn't getting, in Bear Bryant's mind, it's just due, and he kind of wasn't getting the notoriety that he probably should have been getting, overshadowed by the basketball program there. He went to Texas A&M for a few years and then to Alabama. So he left Kentucky. If he would have stayed there, maybe Kentucky would be the dominant program today in the Southeast instead of Alabama or Clemson or who these other teams. But he goes on to Alabama and becomes the most successful college football coach in history. Well, even to this day, probably. But as far as national titles go, but certainly at the time of his retirement. He was nicknamed Bear because as a teenager in Arkansas, he once wrestled a circus bear. You can see his overall record. He held the record for most wins at the time of his retirement, and he won 6 national championships, including twice back-to-back. He just made Alabama the dominant program in college football while he was there. 14 SEC championships, one with Kentucky, and then 13 with Alabama. He won all kinds of Coaches of the Year awards. His Alabama teams played in 24 straight bowl games. At the University of Alabama, there is the Paul W. Bryant Museum. They have a museum for him. Paul W. Bryant Hall for students to live in, a residence hall. The Paul W. Bryant Drive, a street named after him, and Bryant-Denny Stadium is named after him. So, he is Mr. Football. He's Mr. Alabama. Of course, known for his trademark black and white houndstooth hat. He had this deep, grumbling voice, right? Rumbling, grumbling. And he would always have his game plan rolled up into a scroll-looking thing on the sidelines during the game. So that was Bear Bryant, and he is as legendary as college football coaches get. Woody Hayes was the Ohio State coach for almost 3 decades. 5 national titles, 2 in the 50s, 2 in the 60s, and then in 1970. So 5 national titles covering 3 different decades. 13 Big Ten championships, all kinds of Coaches of the Year awards. He coached 3 Heisman winners and 51 first-team All-Americans. He was gritty. He was tough. He was mean. He was intense. He coached his players to do things perfectly. He expected precision, and he is one of the great all-time winners in college football. You can see 238 wins, only 72 losses at in his time on the sidelines. So Woody Hayes is Mr. Ohio State football, no doubt about it, and perhaps will be forever. Bud Wilkinson coached at Oklahoma for over a decade and a half, and you can see 145 wins, only 29 losses, 3 national titles in the 50s, and 14 conference championships. You can see between 1953 and 57, his team won 47 straight games, which is a Division I record. Basically, it's like 4 years in a row of being undefeated. That's unbelievable. He also won 31 straight games from 1948 to 1950. That's like 2.5 years straight of being undefeated. Extremely organized. Again, talk about precision. Talk about attention to detail. He would post practice schedules broken down to the minute. So, talk about, just, probably OCD, right? But just everything was about precision with him. You can see in the bottom left there is a picture of him and President Kennedy. But he is, he's one of the great coaches in Oklahoma history, no doubt about it. Ara Parsigan coached a couple different places, and Miami of Ohio and then Northwestern, but then he went to Notre Dame for a decade and won 2 national titles, 1966 and 1973. He was Coach of the Year numerous times for different outlets and things like that, but he kind of kept that Notre Dame tradition going. That Newt Rockne and Coach Leahy, had started. Parsigan kept it going, and before coaching, actually, he'd been in the U.S. Navy in World War II. So these guys that were in the military, especially during war times, I mean, they brought that mentality to the sideline with them. And a football game wasn't quite as big a deal, probably to some of these guys, because especially if you've seen combat, if you've seen action in war, a football game is pretty trivial by comparison. So, um, you know, they wouldn't usually get overly nervous. They usually wouldn't, the moment wasn't too big for them because they'd been through bigger things. And so Parsigan brought that idea and that mentality uh, to his coaching and to the sideline, and it worked. He was obviously extremely successful and had great athletes and recruited great athletes, and Notre Dame was awesome while he was there. Coach Royal, Darrell K. Royal, was most famous for his time at Texas, and almost two decades worth. And you can see 184 wins, only 60 losses, three national titles at Texas, and 11 conference championships, 11 seasons finishing in the top 10. You can see he had 77 all conference players, 26 all Americans, Coach of the Year award uh, multiple times. Texas plays its home games at Darrell K Royal Texas Memorial Stadium. So it's quite an honor if the stadium is named after you. And Darrell K Royal is one of the great Texas coaches that we've seen, maybe the best at the University of Texas. Of course, down in the Southwest and South, football is king down there. And so to be successful down there, you're going to have to deal with a lot, and there's a lot of pressure to win. And of course, at Texas, your main rival is Oklahoma and Nebraska. At Oklahoma, your main rivals are Nebraska and Texas. I mean, so and so those teams always battled it out during the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and they're still rivals, of course, today, big time. But during those years that Coach Royal was there, it was always a battle with those other teams, and he was very successful. Bobby Bowden, legendary coach at Florida State, forever. Okay, um, he coached just amazing teams year after year at Florida State. They were awesome. And of course, this is kind of when he was coaching, especially in the 90s and the 2000s. Florida, Miami, Florida State, all three of them down there in the state of Florida were always just gobbling up just high quality recruits, and they were battling each other all the time for college football supremacy. So while he was at Florida State, his teams uh, had 14 straight years finishing in the top five. That's how dominant they were. 11 consecutive bowl wins. He's the only coach to win 11 consecutive bowl games. And he won two national titles while he was there, 12 conference championships as well. You can see all his conference championships, national championship rings he's got on, some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And man, 357 wins in a career. And Bobby Bowden really cared about his players. At least that's the impression we always got, is that he loved his boys. He wanted to coach them to be not only great players but great people, and he really cared. And he was a nice guy. And so Bobby Bowden, no doubt, one of the great legendary coaches ever. In the list of Nebraska greats, as far as coaching goes, Bob Devaney's up there as well. Coached at Nebraska for a decade, uh, two national championships back to back, 1970 and 71. Had a 32 game winning streak as well, basically 2.5 years where they didn't lose a game. Took Nebraska to 9 bowl games. He had been extremely successful at Wyoming before he came to Nebraska, and that's why he got the Nebraska job. But at Nebraska, he won eight. Excuse me. Yeah, he won 8 Big 8 championships, so 8 conference championships to go along with those back-to-back national championships. Um, he kept the Nebraska tradition going. Tough-minded, uh, practice. You know, if you practice with precision and expect perfection in practice, you're gonna maybe, hopefully get that in the game. And that was kind of the mentality. And so he brought that intensity from the practice field, uh, onto the into game day, and his coach and his coaching staff knew they had to work just as hard as he did, and his players knew that he expected greatness from them. John McKay is the legendary coach of USC. He coached USC from 1960 to 1975, won 127 games, only lost 40, and 4 national championships. He made USC kind of the dominant power that we kind of know them to be. Okay, um, he won 9 conference titles while he was there, and led USC to the Rose Bowl 8 times, and they won 5 of those games. He coached 40 All-Americans and 2 Heisman winners, won Coach of the Year award twice, and he coached some of the greats that college football has ever seen. So those 4 national titles, 62, 67, 72, and 74, that's pretty amazing. And he'd served in the U.S. Army Air Force in World War II, saw action in the Pacific. So again, he was a battle-hardened war veteran who, football was a game that he could handle, and he knew how to work with guys, knew how to coach and work with other people, and make them better people and better players. And definitely, Coach McKay is one of the legends. Joe Paterno, Joe Pa, coached at Penn State from 1966 to 2011. Division I record of 409 wins. 5 undefeated seasons at Penn State, 29 seasons finishing in the top 10. Led Penn State to 37 bowl games, which is a NCAA record. 24 bowl wins, also an NCAA record. Was the first coach to win each of the 4 major bowls: the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and the Sugar Bowl. 2 national championships at Penn State, 1982 and 1986. He was just a consistent winner. Tough, gritty, got those northeastern, tough players. The sons of the factory and mill workers, to come and play football for him. And of course, that area of Pennsylvania is a hotbed for football. And so he was always up there. His teams were always up there, being very competitive and some of the best in the country, if not the best overall. But unfortunately for him, his last years there were rocked by scandal, and he was basically kind of forced out of Penn State in 2011, and he died basically the next year. He died in 2012, kind of a broken man in some ways, but he basically gave his life to Penn State football. So Joe Pa, yep, absolutely, all-time legend. Speaking of legends, especially around these parts, is Lavelle Edwards, legendary coach at BYU from 1972 to 2000. Won 257 games while at BYU and a national championship in 1984. He won 18 WAC championships and then one Mountain West title, so 19 conference championships at the Y. 31 All-Americans played under him, including 4 W Bryant Award winners and 7 Sammy Baugh Award winners for best quarterback in the nation. BYU kind of became quarterback U with him, from guys like Gifford Nielsen to Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Robbie Bosco, Ty Detmer. These guys that just shattered college football record, record after record. He was kind of the guy behind that. His teams led the nation in passing offense 8 times, total offense 5 times, and scoring offense 3 times. And so what Lavelle Edwards is kind of most famous for, really, in the college football realm, is revolutionizing the offensive game and the passing game in particular, and the schemes that teams would use for the passing game, the different receiver sets and different routes. And I mean, you had to have smart quarterbacks to know where all the players were going to be and all the receivers were going to be, and you had to have guys who could get the ball there on time and get it in the right receiver's hands to make a play, and his quarterbacks were just masterful at that. Of course, BYU's home stadium is called Lavelle Edwards Stadium in his honor, but yeah, his contribution to the game, along with being one of the all-time nice guys, and obviously surrounding himself with other really good assistant coaches, which these great head coaches have to do that. You have to surround yourself with great assistants who can also help you recruit and can coach up your players. And that's part of being a great head coach, is being a great teacher and developing assistant coaches into to become great head coaches themselves potentially, right? So, but he and his coaching staff just revolutionized offense in college football. And so a lot of the offense you see today, and which is pass heavy, really is kind of got its start with Lavelle Edwards, and a lot of the pro football offenses that you see, um, kind of the passing games have kind of copied a lot of what BYU used to do. So um, yeah, Lavelle Edwards. Of course, I grew up a BYU fan and still am, of course. I went there, and so Lavelle Edwards was kind of the guy for me, right? And so I grew up watching his teams play, and he was the coach while I was there. Barry Switzer, one of the toughest-minded, greatest coaches ever. Oklahoma for a decade and a half, 157 wins, only 29 losses, 3 national championships, including back-to-back in '74 and '75, 12 Big Eight titles, 10 seasons with at least 10 wins, and 10 seasons finishing in the top 5. He just was awesome. And Oklahoma was awesome while he was there. He expected awesomeness, okay? And he got it. His players knew what to expect. He consistently recruited great talent and developed that great talent into even greater talent. And of course, that's one of the signs of a great coach is you have to be able to get the talent, but then you have to develop it into something even better. And you have to be able to also see talent, when maybe other people don't always see it. You get that diamond in the rough, that player who's not highly recruited, but you can see that they can develop into a star. And Barry Switzer could do that. And yeah, Oklahoma, you knew was going to be up there. They were consistently going to be one of the nation's powerhouse teams while he was coaching. Tom Osborne was the coach in Nebraska for about 2.5 decades and extremely successful. 70s, 80s, 90s. Nebraska was a powerhouse. 255 wins, only 49 losses, an 836 winning percentage. So he won basically 83, 84% of his games. He won at least 9 games every year at Nebraska and had 15 seasons with at least 10 wins. In fact, his last 5 seasons, he was basically as successful as any college coach has ever been over a 5 season span. His team went 60 wins and 3 losses. Okay. Went to a bowl game all 25 years at Nebraska. Every year he led Nebraska to a bowl game and 3 national titles. I mean, he was always good. Nebraska was always good during the '70s, during the '80s, but then in the '90s, including his last years, they're just dominant. Okay, 3 national titles in 4 years, 13 conference championships. He was the ESPN Coach of the Decade for the '90s, National Coach of the Year a couple different times, right? Um, Conference Coach of the Year multiple times. But those '90s teams, those 3 national title teams in particular, were some of the most dominant and best college football teams ever for any era, any decade. And so, yeah, he left on a high note there when he retired in 1997 after that 3rd national title. And man, those teams were good. They were as good compared to their competition as I've ever seen in college football. Pete Carroll um, was the USC coach for 9 seasons, And while he was there, USC was consistently probably the best college football team in the country. I mean, overall for those 9 seasons. 97 wins, only 19 losses, 2 national championships, 2003 and 4. The 2004 BCS national title as well. It was the first year the BCS kind of started. It had been the Associated Press, would name a national champion before that, but the BCS started doing their thing. And then in his 9 seasons, he won 7 straight Pac-10 conference championships and 7 straight AP top 4 finishes during those seasons. Like I said, including 2 national titles. 6 bowl game wins, 4 Rose Bowls, 2 Orange Bowls. 33 straight weeks as the AP's #1 team, which is a national record. During his 9 seasons, he coached 25 first-team All-Americans, had 53 players drafted, including 14 in the first round, and 3 Heisman Trophy winners. 34-game winning streak during those national championship years. Just awesome. The USC was electrifying on the field while he was the coach. They were just dominating the recruiting battle, especially guys from the West Coast. But man, his teams were awesome. They were fast. Their offenses were great. Their defenses were great. And so Pete Carroll, after the 2009 season, went to the NFL and started coaching the Seahawks and won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. So he's one of only 3 coaches to win a college national championship and a Super Bowl. Barry Switzer did it at Oklahoma and then with the Dallas Cowboys, and Jimmy Johnson did it at the University of Miami and then with the Dallas Cowboys. So Pete Carroll has had a pretty great and complete football coaching career. Steve Spurrier is one of the great coaches who was also a great player. Spurrier won a Heisman Trophy in 1966 at the University of Florida. And he was also a 2-time first-team All-American quarterback, junior and senior year at Florida. And so, in his senior year, he won all the awards, the Heisman and the UPI and the Walter Camp and, SEC Player of the Year. So he was a great college player. Then he got into coaching, and he coached at Duke for a few seasons, and then he got his dream job back at Florida, his alma mater. He coached there for over a decade. He finished off after Florida. He went and coached at South Carolina for a decade. And you can see he won 228 games as a coach, including a national championship at Florida in 1996. He won 6 SEC championships at Florida as well. And a bunch of times coach of the year in the SEC and twice even in the ACC with Duke. He actually made Duke football decent. Okay. But, wanted to win a Heisman and then a national championship as a coach, decades apart, 3 decades apart at the same school, right? Pretty awesome and quite an accomplishment. So Steve Spurrier. Nick Saban is a household name for college football fans in our day and age. Nick Saban coached at Michigan State for 5 seasons and made them really good. Then went to LSU for 5 seasons, won a national title there, and then has coached at Alabama from 2007 to the present in 2020. Okay. I don't have his overall coaching record up there because it's still going. All right. He's still coaching, but his coaching record is phenomenal. He has won 6 BCS national championships. Okay, like I said, 2003 with LSU, and then 2009, 11, 12, 15, and 17 with Alabama. 8 SEC titles, Coach of the Year numerous times, but his LSU national title and then his Alabama national titles. Dominant teams, great offenses, really great defenses usually. The defense is kind of the trademark for his teams. Of course, he has great offensive talent as well, but his defenses have been dominant, and that's really what's helped him win national titles. And so that's been the catalyst. And of course, the offense, has been good enough to do the job as well. So Nick Saban will go down as one of the all-time legendary coaches. But 6 national titles, right up there with Bear Bryant, uh, and 5 at Alabama. Of course, Bear Bryant had 6 at Alabama, but if Nick Saban gets another, then he'll be up there with Bear Bryant as far as Alabama national titles goes. So, but yep, absolutely one of the all-time legends. Bob Stoops is one of the great coaches from the 2000s to through the 2010s or into the 2010s. 190 wins, only 48 losses at Oklahoma. Won a national title in the year 2010. Big 12 championships to his name at Oklahoma. Um, he just was Oklahoma. He kept the tradition going that Bud Wilkinson and Barry Switzer, and other guys had really laid the foundation for. Bob Stoops kept it going there in the Midwest, in Norman, Oklahoma. So, and Oklahoma, of course, since he left, is fantastic as well. But Bob Stoops was a great recruiter and a great coach. Great coach on the sidelines, great motivator, and his players loved playing for him. Les Miles, the Mad Hatter, known for doing kind of unpredictable things during a game, things you wouldn't think of, fake punts or fake field goals when you wouldn't expect it, things like that. Oklahoma State coach for 4 seasons and was really good there. Then he coached at LSU for over a decade. Retired from coaching and then got back into it because a lot of these coaches just can't stay away from the sideline. He got back into coaching with Kansas in 2019. National championship in the 2007 season, but of course January of 2008 with LSU, and 2 SEC titles, 2007 and 2011. He was just he was and is a really good coach and really good recruiter. So we'll have to see what happens at Kansas, because Kansas has kind of been the doormat of their conference for a long time. But let's see if he can resurrect that program. But man, he's a heck of a coach. So that's Les Miles. And Urban Meyer. Bowling Green, Utah, Florida, and Ohio State. Everywhere he's coached, he's won. Overall coaching record, 187 wins, only 32 losses. 3 national championships. 2 at Florida, 2006, 2008, and then Ohio State in 2014. Led Utah to a Fiesta Bowl win in the 2004 season. So, he would get to a place, and he's a tremendous developer of talent and expects perfection, and his players really respect him, and he practices hard. His players play hard, and he can recruit like crazy. So, yeah, he's been successful everywhere he's been, and his 3 national titles are proof of that. So, his record speaks for itself. His award, the awards he's won speak for themselves. He was the Sports Illustrated and Sporting News Coach of the Decade for the 2000s, and yeah, he's a dynamo. He gets in to a program and he makes them good, and so that's Urban Meyer's legacy.